mini episode number 432 of Real Life Ghost Stories. So before we start this week, obviously it is a mini episode on a Sunday. Who'd have thought? Basically, at the time that this episode comes out, I will be in Berlin running my 4th of 7 half marathons. I am doing 7 half marathons in 7 countries in aid of the British Heart Foundation in memory of Dan. And listen, I don't like doing this, right? But I'm going to leave the link to my donation page in the description of this episode. Please feel free to donate if you can, but I'm also very aware that times are tricky at the moment financially for people, so don't feel like you are obliged to donate at all. So for this week and for next week, the main episode will be mini episodes. When I'm finished in Berlin, I am going to Ireland to do some work on a documentary, which is very exciting. But I decided that while I was doing those things that I would take a small break from doing main episodes and do a couple of mini episodes instead, and normal service will resume ASAP. And I have 4 spooky stories for you today, and the last story comes from December the 17th, 2024. And story number 1 comes from Ricardo. My name is Ricardo and I come from a family of witches, which currently my dad and me are the ones left who practice witchcraft, and one of my cousins who we are currently teaching. This story takes place in the city of Cuba Diaz in Puerto Rico, the last night of the summer in 2011. I remember it a few weeks before this day, my dad was telling a story about the spirit of a woman who roamed the old Gothic cemetery of our town. He told me that when he was very young, one of his teachers told him this story. He said that back in the 18th century, a French woman named Madame Coutoneau and her German husband moved to Puerto Rico because her husband was in charge of building the train tracks. My dad's teacher said that she died of an asthma attack while she was pregnant. He said that you could see this woman walking in the cemetery at midnight if there is a full moon. It was a nice evening at the end of the summer in 2011. I was relaxing, playing with my laptop in the room upstairs. I heard someone calling me outside, and right after that, Mom shouted at me, "Hey Ricky, your friend John is calling you." I went down the stairs and outside of the house to greet him. He asked me if I wanted to go with him to the city to play basketball. I agreed, and on our way we stopped at the house of our friend Nate to pick him up to go to the city. We finished playing basketball at around 11 p.m. and started heading back home. By the time we made it to the old high school, it was 11:30 p.m. I started feeling odd, like something out of the normal was about to happen. I suddenly started to hear my dad's voice in my head telling me the story of Madame Coutoneau. I looked at my watch and it was 11:30 p.m. And by the time we made it to the old cemetery, it was going to be 12 a.m, midnight. I looked at the sky and there was a full moon. There were no clouds in the sky. The sky was clear. To make it back to our houses, we had to pass by 2 cemeteries, and the old Gothic cemetery is one of them. As we approached the cemetery, the feeling and the energy that something out of the ordinary was about to happen intensified. As we walked, John was on my right-hand side, while Nate was on my left-hand side, leaving me in the middle. John stopped in one of the corners of the cemetery to pee while Nate and I kept walking. I switched sides with Nate, and now I was on his left-hand side, leaving him clearly exposed to the cemetery. I stayed looking forward because I sensed some entity in the cemetery and I didn't want to look. Nate called my name. He sounded surprised and scared. He said, "Hey Ricky," as he elbowed my right arm. "Look at that." When I turned my head to the cemetery, there she was, walking from left to right. She had a beautiful white dress with a nice white floral crown. She was holding a white flower bouquet. Her skin colour was a very light baby blue. I could see through her. She was the only shiny thing in that cemetery. Her dress looked like a wedding dress, but it wasn't a wedding dress. She had very thin white silk covering her beautiful face. We got scared and started running. John called up to us later and asked us what had happened. We talked about it all the way home until we reached our houses. We were scared. Her story has become a legend in our town. People have changed her story, saying that she comes out at night crying with a baby in her arms, but that is a lie. Because when my friend and I saw her, she wasn't crying, nor did she have a baby in her arms. I love these stories where you've got a sort of an urban legend of a city or a town that ends up having truth in it. And I guess when you come from a family of witches, right, you're going to have some sort of intuitive feelings about, entities, spirits, etc. Or at least you're going to pay attention to those intuitive feelings when you're walking home and you're like, uh-oh, we're going to have to go past the old Gothic cemetery and I have a feeling that we're going to see something. And then it's not just a single person that sees this thing, it's your friend Nate, who was the one that was like, look at her, look at her walking through the cemetery with her white flowers and her skin being kind of baby blue and you can see through her. And I mean, she, for all intents and purposes, she sounds quite beautiful as an entity. And I wonder why she only shows up at midnight on nights where there's a full moon. That's a really interesting little facet to the story. And it kind of makes it sound like it is more of an urban legend, but then that's what happened to you guys. I also like how this story is kind of shows us how these stories change over time, how these urban legends develop, how stuff is added to them, how they start with, I guess, at least a grain of truth in them. And then we add to the story over time. So it becomes more, I don't know, representative of the original story rather than true to the original story. I also would like to say that I do think that families of witches, people who pass down witchcraft from generation to generation, I think it just makes you inherently cool. I really do. I know that's very shallow of me, but I do just think it makes you cool. And story number 2 comes from Beck. I was getting ready to leave for work over the weekend and feeling a bit glum over the prospect of the first of 3 night shifts. As I wandered around the house, procrastinating and feeling a bit sorry for myself, I randomly asked Alexa to read me a poem. I've never done it before, and don't know what possessed me to say it then, but she responded with this classic. The boy stood on the burning deck, picking his nose like mad. He rolled them into little balls and flicked them at his dad. My dad, who died a few years ago now, used to love to recite this, and I couldn't tell you how often I heard it from him as a child and an adult. Just a weird coincidence? Almost certainly, but I'm choosing to believe it was my dad trying to cheer me up. It worked. I laughed out loud and went off to work with a spring in my step. Thanks, Dad. Okay, so we're going to do a little experiment right now because I've got an Alexa beside me. Alexa, tell me a poem.
I eat my peas with honey. I've done it all my life. It makes the peas taste funny, but it keeps them on the knife.
Thanks, Alexa. So it just goes to show that it's not like that's a stock answer for her. Oh, I love that. Listen, I'm going to choose to believe, Beck, for you too, that is your dad. That's your dad's way of being like, I'm here, cheer up. It's okay. This is a silly little thing that I used to say to you as a child and an adult, a little poem that I used to recite. And I think that's really sweet. And I do think that whether you're like a hardcore skeptic or a hardcore believer or whatever, I think it's okay in these situations to be like, this is something that I've taken comfort from, so I'm just going to accept that this is my dad's way of communicating with me, and we're not going to read too much into it, And story number 3 comes from Anonymous. My previous entry was in mini episode 403. It was about my relationship with the woman I'm promised to, and how us being promised to each other is just par for the course. I mentioned my home region in my first entry, Virginia's New River Valley. You might think the name is a giveaway, but that's far from the truth. The Appalachian and Blue Ridge Mountains that surround the valley are some of the oldest structures on Earth. The New River itself is one of the most ancient flows of water on Earth. This place gives an ancient vibe, a place where people are living but it's still very much untamed wilderness. Deer are a very common sight. Raccoons, you'll hear coyotes howling from time to time, and if you're lucky, you might spot a black bear. Cougars or mountain lions are also known around here, but they never leave the heavy forest areas. This place was one of the last places in North America to be colonised by the Native Americans. This area was mostly Cherokee and Shawnee tribe land. When they found it, they named it Kanawha, which means big water. With a place this old, ghost stories abound here. Everything from unknown animals to haunted asylums. Yes, asylums plural. There are a handful of such places across the valley. I drive past one of them twice a week, the infamous St Albans Sanitarium. Like yours in Ireland and England, the amount of truly mentally ill it held was small. Most of them were people with emotional issues or head pain. With my family's tendency towards depression and losing their temper fast, I believe you can imagine St Albans, while still operating, held a few of my family. I wouldn't be surprised if any of my family were haunting it either. There was a case of a guard being forced over a stair railing and falling to the floor below. You might think of ghosts as frail. The guard described that ghost as a middle-aged man, and certainly not frail, but muscled like a pro wrestler. With the crazy jobs that my family has been under, I could see that as possibly one of them. My dad has made a solemn vow never to set foot near that place. He asked me to do the same. Never set foot in there, it's an evil place. I often think about these sort of vast expanses in America, these like untamed wildernesses. And I think it's fascinating. You know, Ireland is a very small country. It's a small island, comparatively. And I sort of think about these huge expanses of space. And I think of all of the wildlife that lives in there, all of the places that you can disappear, all of the places you can hide things. Like, it just blows my mind. And then, of course, having these sanatoriums, having these lunatic asylums out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, for people in more built-up areas at the time, it was seen as, okay, let's move these people out of sight, out of mind. And also then, you know, in these middle-of-nowhere asylums, bad things happened because there was nobody there to really check, you know. Nobody was keeping tabs on all of this. And it always seems like with these places, you know, like with this place, St Albans, that there is often a real physical element to hauntings, like a real violent physical element. And it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me at all. That is definitely somewhere that I need to research for an episode. Although, you know, like I said, when we looked at Eloise lunatic asylum or psychiatric hospital, I have to space those stories out, much like stories of witch trials, because they often follow the same pattern, the same narrative pattern. So I have to space those bad boys out, you know?
Instacart is on a mission to have you not leave the couch this basketball season. Because between the pre-game rituals and the post-game interviews, it can be difficult to find time for everything else. So let Instacart take care of your game day snacks or weekly restocks and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Because we hear it's bad luck to be hungry on game day. So download the Instacart app today and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 orders. Service fees apply for 3 orders and 14 days, excludes restaurants.
And our final story today comes from Rachel. I would like to flag that this contains references to terminal illness, bereavement and mental health issues. In October 2023, we tragically lost my nan to pancreatic cancer. I can only describe the process to you as entirely brutal. It shattered my family's world, as cancer does, and I am sure that many listeners can relate. The so-called anticipatory grief, i.e. grieving a person as they battle their terminal condition, ripped through us all and had everyone acting out of character. At the time, my fiancé and I had not long moved into our first home. We're planning our wedding, and I was suffering at the hands of premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which had me in the biggest depressive and anxious grip that I have ever experienced. This was undoubtedly the hardest time of my life. My mental health was quickly deteriorating. I was going dizzy, could not leave the house by myself, was questioning everything about my life, and when my nan finally passed, it hit me in ways that I had never imagined. I guess you could say that it was the tip of the iceberg. I essentially experienced a mental breakdown. The series of events that I'm describing below may not be paranormal. They could be explained by my family's grief or merely a bunch of coincidences. But I like to hope that they are more than that. A bit of background. My nan and I, although not super close towards the end, had shared a bond over mental health since I was 11 years old. She was one of the first people to support me with panic attacks and anxiety, introducing me to my first ever self-help book, and helping me to normalise what I was going through. She was known in the family for being someone to talk to about their worries and troubles because she had been through so much herself. Another important thing to note was that my nan was a huge fan of the band Queen. I only discovered this in her final days, when my cousins played her some songs in the hospice. She was also incredibly spiritual and loved crystals. During my nan's final days, I spent a lot of time with her in the hospice. At one point, whilst my auntie and I were in the room, she said, "I can see Grandad." I looked at my auntie dumbfounded. My aunt just smiled and said, "That's lovely," in a warm tone. I understand that seeing past loved ones is common towards the end of life, and that there are some scientific theories to explain this. Hallucination or not, we'll never know for sure, but it was certainly comforting for her and for us. My auntie seems to always have been intuitive for as long as I can remember. I won't go into too many details because that's not my story to tell, but in the context of this story, something that I seem to remember is her predicting that something not good was on the cards for my nan. She had gone to have a hip replacement, which was fine, but shortly after she deteriorated and experienced jaundice, and some quick testing revealed her terminal cancer diagnosis. My auntie also predicted that my uncle's wife's granddad would pass on the same day as my nan, and that is exactly what happened. Additionally, my nan passed away a day after my own grandfather's anniversary of passing, who had been her husband. My auntie, my dad, my cousins and their brothers had all been at the hospice before her passing, having been told that the end was near, so they stuck around. When things seemed more stable, many of them left, having been up all night, and it was only when most of them had left that she passed. They had been back on their way, but it was too late. My dad and auntie firmly believed that she waited for specific people to leave, as she felt that it would be too much for them to bear if they had to witness her go. I think I agree, as I don't know how my dad would have coped. It was the night of Nan's passing. We toasted to her over a Bailey's, one of her favourite drinks. We also decided to order a Chinese takeaway as this was her favourite. That same night, my partner thought he could smell my nan's home. It had a distinct smell of orange, cranberry and mulled wine candles. He had only been to her house once, and this was when it got a little strange. We made the takeaway order via Uber Eats, and not long after it had been accepted, the order just cancelled. That had never happened before at that restaurant, as it was our usual go-to. We tried another local, put the order through, and guess what? The same thing happened. It just cancelled. I thought this odd and wondered if something was wrong with Uber Eats. I was scrolling through other places, determined to have a Chinese, and then I came across a Chinese restaurant we'd never tried before. It was advertised as 40% off the bill on Uber Eats. We put through our order, and this time no problems at all. The food came, and genuinely it was so good. It's been our new go-to ever since. As far-fetched as this sounds, I took it as a sign that my nan didn't want us paying the full price to honour her. Every day after my nan's passing, I became more mentally unwell. At my worst, I was heaving and I could not get out of bed. I remember being on the phone to my manager, completely hysterical, as I told her that I needed to start later because I couldn't bring myself to move, and I eventually had to take extended time off. My husband, or fiancé at the time, did everything he could to console me, but I was screaming. Everything just felt irreparable and utterly hopeless. My mental health was out of control and my nan was gone. So I started to shout and plead out loud. "Nan, where are you? Please give me a sign." Instantly my phone started to go off. My fiancé and I fell silent as it rang. It turns out that it was just my alarm, but the timing was uncanny. Was it my nan trying to give me the only sign she could to reassure me that she was there? Earlier I mentioned that months leading up to my nan's passing I was constantly going dizzy. Before this I had been a very active person, particularly with running, but I had lost this part of me as the dizziness got worse, which funnily enough correlated with nan's deteriorating health. I didn't want to walk anywhere myself, let alone run. When nan later passed, my anxiety was spiralling out of control. Running had been such a coping mechanism for me before, and I needed it now more than ever. So one day I questioned what I had to lose. I put on my running gear and out the door I went. With Queen playing, I willed myself to go. And before I knew it, I was moving. I did a solid 5k that night, the first run in months. When the 5k was complete, I broke down in tears, and the streetlight before me flashed continually, which made me cry more. Could it have been my nan powering me through that run? The dizziness disappeared after that day, just like that. I couldn't believe it. I mentioned earlier about crystals. My family are really into crystals. When my auntie learned of my anxiety, she had told me about something that a psychic had said to her. Find a rose quartz, wash it and keep it close. This will ease the anxiety. I was pretty sure that I had a rose quartz from somewhere years ago, but I didn't know where, so it left my head. Anyway, before Nan had passed, my cousin had been showing her some old memories. She got out a tin with angels on the cover that Nan had given to both of us when we were children. In the tin, my cousin had stored things that were precious to her over the years. I decided to dig out my own tin, as I knew I had it somewhere. I found it and opened it. I couldn't believe it when I saw that inside it was a small rose quartz. I couldn't believe that I had just found it there, of all places. One of the last things Nan had said was that she was going to haunt my brother. This is because my brother is as atheist as they come and has no belief in an afterlife whatsoever. She asked my cousins for ideas on how to haunt him. Fast forward to a week or so after her passing, when my brother, fiancé and I were attending a Fall Out Boy gig that we had pre-booked a year before. I went along, feeling like I was on fire, hoping it would do me good. It didn't. We had a drink before the gig and shared stories about Nan, and I told my brother that she was a Queen fan, which he didn't know either. During the night, Fall Out Boy were playing a cover song. We'd seen the set list and had an idea of what was coming up. However, the song they played had not been on the set list at all. They played Don't Stop Me Now, a Queen song. My heart dropped. My brother's face was a complete picture. He simply sunk into his seat, mouth wide open. We'd just spoken about Queen, and now they were playing it. Could this somehow have been my nan delivering a sign to my brother like she promised she would? What a way to get his attention. It was the final day that my nan came out of her hospice room. We took her to the hospice shop. She'd always loved little shops, and this one was no different. She picked up a few things that she wanted, including a mindfulness colouring book. The book said, Mindfulness Colouring for Rachel. She gave it to me and told me that it would calm me down. Because she knew, despite everything that she was going through, that I wasn't okay. I was so touched by the gesture. And then fast forward to when she had since passed and I was in despair and hunched up on my parents' sofa. I took out my colouring book and some colouring pens. The act of colouring was by no means a miracle cure, but it filled me with warmth. It has since inspired me to buy more, and I'm regularly colouring now. When things got bad, they got really bad, and nothing was working, not any books or running or colouring. I was questioning my life. It felt like I couldn't possibly sink any further, but it also felt like things couldn't ever get better either. Then one day my auntie messaged me. Her, my dad and my other uncles had been sorting out my nan's house and belongings. They moved through this rapidly and the house was almost clear besides some furniture. She said she had found some books in my nan's drawer that no one had been through yet. She said that she knew that Nan would have wanted me to have them. The 3 books were all by Dr. Claire Weekes, including Self-Help for Your Nerves. This was the book. The first self-help book I'd ever read about mental health, the one my nan had lent me all those years ago. I couldn't believe my nan had it after all these years. I took it to my parents. I opened the book, and on the first page that I landed on, the book was talking about working through the fire and how the only way to overcome this was to work through it. This had been something that had stuck with me ever since I'd first laid eyes on the book. Upon reading those words, I can only describe a pure feeling of euphoria, an embrace outside of my body. I really don't have the vocabulary to describe it. Maybe it was just a product of my grief and depression, but it felt realer than anything I could imagine. It felt as if something clicked back into place, and I had regained yet another part of myself. I continued to read the book every day after this, progressing through the chapters and absorbing all the teachings, and it was like having my nan with me again. I truly believe she prompted my aunt to retrieve those books and give them to me. Another weird thing happened to my dad. He'd been at my nan's helping with the clear out, and he'd been talking aloud, hoping that he could get a sign from her that she was there. Nothing happened. It's interesting because my auntie had felt that the house was simply a shell since Nan had passed, and she was convinced my Nan was not there at all. Anyway, my dad went home and was clearing out the front drive when he heard it. A small, faded whisper in his ear. "Danny." He said it was my Nan's voice, and it completely spooked him out. Was it Nan answering his call, making it clear that she was not at our house anymore, but instead around all of us? Several months after my Nan's passing and several months into taking antidepressants, and I was gradually getting better. Something that was noticeably odd was that I continued to see the number 11. It was everywhere. Anyway, when I looked this up, it turned out that it means spiritual awakening. Change is coming, at least according to Google. I think it was right because following my wedding, being on medication, dropping friendships that no longer served me, it felt like I was finally being my most authentic self. It was a real energy shift. I brought some crystals into our home. I tried spiritualist church and mediums. I started listening to this podcast. I practiced more yoga and focused on my job, family, and prioritised other friendships. Fast forward more time and I saw a psychic who insisted that I would see white feathers if I wasn't already seeing them, and that it would be from my Nan. I rolled my eyes at this, because I know they regularly say such things. And on one down day, I was complaining to my partner on our daily walk that I hadn't received a sign from my Nan for a long time, and I was beginning to question all the previous signs. And then, as we approached the lake, I saw it. White feathers everywhere, all across the grass and falling from the sky. The area was usually populated with ducks, geese and pigeons, so it would make sense to see feathers, but so many, falling from the sky, and straight after I had just made a comment about no signs from my Nan. That really sounds like your Nan went, "Oh, you're complaining about not getting any signs from me, but I'm going to give you a sign." And then you get feathers falling from the sky, feathers everywhere, and she's like, "There's your sign." And just to say, going back to the beginning of this story, trying to manage PMDD and severe anxiety while also trying to manage the impact of death on your family and anticipatory grief is pretty horrendous to be honest. And I love the fact that after your Nan's death that you all held on to these little moments as signs from her. So your Chinese order, the alarm going off after you being really distressed and calling out for a sign, Fall Out Boy playing Don't Stop Me Now, rose quartz crystal, self-help book, and the whispered voice in your dad's ear. Like that's crazy. And I'm really glad for you that you found ways to heal, that you found things that worked for you moving forward in terms of your PMDD and in terms of your anxiety and of course your grief. And I'm going to say something really briefly about grief, right? Because we often talk about grief in very linear terms, and we talk about the stages of grief, like denial, bargaining, anger, all that stuff. I think it's important to note that when we talk about the stages of grief, originally the stages of grief was a research study that was done on people who were dying. So people who were terminally ill, knew they were going to die, and the stages of grief applied to them, not to the people who are left behind. So grief can look wild and messy and not what we think it's going to look like, and not what is portrayed in films. And stages of grief, I mean, it's essentially a real thing, but not in the way that we think it is. And if your grief looks different than other people's, then listen, it's fine. And as always, when we're talking about grief, I always take a minute to recommend the book It's Okay That You're Not Okay by a writer called Megan Devine. It is a book about grief and how you survive grief, and it is very, very good. And I would recommend it to anybody who is grieving in either an anticipatory way or grieving the loss of somebody, or who can't seem to move forward, or who knows somebody who's grieving. It is a really good book. It's called It's Okay That You're Not Okay by Megan Devine. And thank you for listening to today's episode. Thank you to Ricardo, Beck, Anonymous and Rachel for sending in your stories. Remember, the last story came from December the 17th, 2024. And just to remind you that the link to the GoFundMe for the British Heart Foundation fundraiser will be in the description of this episode. And if you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you can get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
Strap in. You're in the race with F1 TV Premium. See what the race director sees with custom multi-view. Watch every jaw-dropping moment in live 4K UHD. Across up to 6 screens, uninterrupted. Experience ultimate live immersion with F1 TV Premium. Available on selected devices.